Okay, well our final and I hope fun step for you in deciding where the near market is heading is some form of scenario analysis. This is something that allows you to explore what strategies might be effective under future near market conditions. So we're saying certain things we think are going on, we're looking ahead to the future, maybe that'll happen, this will happen, and so on. So we're going to play out various scenarios in terms of things that might happen. Who's involved in this? Well, you are. If you're in an organisation, then of course the Chief Marketing Officer or the Marketing Manager, whoever that senior marketing staff member is, will lead the charge here. The CEO will probably be involved from time to time, and other senior staff. And sometimes it can be useful actually to run, maybe a half-day workshop and bring in a facilitator, an outsider who sort of knows a bit about the business but isn't close to the detail. Okay, so in a commercial setting, this is something you would do from time to time in terms of playing out these scenarios, considering their implications, and deciding what decisions to make on that sort of basis. But even if you're not currently involved in working for an organisation, you can still involve others in this sort of thing, fellow students or friends or whatever, because in part it's the sort of sounding board idea about what about this, what about that, this is going on in this market, where do you think that might lead to, and so on. It can be fun and interesting, and hopefully it certainly becomes a mechanism for continuing to sort of spark this creative, imaginative mindset that I'm trying to encourage. There might be some web-based resources that you can use to help you, or industry reports, a whole range of things that sort of feed into this scenario analysis process. Okay, now it's important to note that a scenario analysis is different from a forecast. Not necessarily, but a forecast usually has a kind of almost a linear or evolutionary component about it. So we've come from here, we're going to there, sort of what's an extension of what's happening. But the problem with forecasting is that it's very easy to miss turning points. A scenario, on the other hand, can cover quite different outcomes and facets. So you can consider quite readily a whole range of possibilities without sort of having to necessarily be bound by this incremental or linear mindset that a forecasting can sometimes lead to. So essentially it's a verbal description of a constant set of factors which to define for you some alternative sets of future business conditions. Okay, I'll say that again. It's a verbal description of a constant set of factors. So we've squared off on certain things that we think are important in the consumer and technology and competitive space. So a verbal description of that, which is defining some alternative sets of future business conditions. Now there's a probability element to this as well. So what that says is we think this is probably the most likely outcome over the next several years. But if we do this, and if we have a sort of a stretch thing as part of our strategy, then perhaps we can take it in this direction. And depending on certain other conditions that we make judgments about, it could go up here, could go down there, could go up and then down. There's various ways it can play out, and you're just trying to form a reasonable, informed view as to where you think things might be going. Now this sort of thinking really follows from the remote market analysis that we did a little earlier in the process, and also the critical success factors that we just looked at in the last section. So scenario analysis is really about this kind of peering into the future. It's never easy, it's never definitive, but it can be fun, and certainly it's important in terms of informing the sort of strategy that we'll need to agree on and put in place as this process proceeds. Now, there's a range of things that you might typically take into account here. Demographic shifts, of course, play out, and occasionally you might go beyond the 3 to 5 year window that we're typically talking about. So if you're thinking about aged care, for instance, the demographics there are fairly predictable, so you could probably project them out even 20 years if you wanted to. And if you're involved in R&D, sometimes you can exceed that 3 to 5 year time frame. And that's a wee bit outside the bound of what we're fundamentally about in this course. So normally you would keep your scenario analysis to that 3 to 5 year window, I would suggest. Strategic marketing scenario should take into account then a range of factors that we considered to this point: consumers, technology, competitive behaviour, segments, the value equation, and all these sorts of elements. Okay. One management writer who has popularised this idea of scenarios, in fact, is a joint author with George Day, a guy called Paul Schumacher from the Wharton School in Philadelphia. And together, several years ago, they wrote a book called Peripheral Vision, Detecting the Weak Signals That Will Make or Break Your Company. Now, you've heard me talk about peripheral, sort of at the periphery of your market already, and the idea in part came from what these two writers have put down. I like this idea of peripheral vision because we can relate to it quite easily. There's things that sort of, as we use our gift of sight, there are things that are particularly to the foreground, but of course if your eyes are working properly, there are things off to the side that you've still got a sense of. You're not focused on them. You kind of have to interpolate a little bit, but there is this idea that things at the margin, and they may start to move into the central vision, and that's really their point. Things at the periphery may in fact become mainstream in the business that you operate in. So the trick here is to kind of detect those weak signals and consider whether they might have some implication for your relevant market and how this will play out in the future. So the capability of your firm or organisation to sort of sense, interpret, act on these signals is known as peripheral vision. The idea is simple enough, and it kind of seems easy actually, but it may or may not surprise you that in the work that Day and Shoemaker did, they found that only 1 in 5 firms actually have this capability in sufficient capacity to remain competitive. Seems strange, doesn't it? But this idea of peripheral vision is actually in a minority in the companies that they studied in detail. And in a New Zealand context, my hunch is it may even be less than 20%. But the good news is, if you're able to develop this capacity and carry it into the organisation where you work, then in years to come, you will definitely be able to bring, I think, a competitive edge by sort of honing and thinking about this capacity of peripheral vision. And the good news is that although we don't have time to get into the detail of their whole methodology, you might want to add their book to your marketing library. And they do develop quite a practical methodology for creating what they term vigilant organisations. Okay, so as I say, we can't explore this in detail, but there's a few little key points that I will draw to your attention around the idea of what it means to build the vigilant firm. They say we need to scope widely and ask the right questions, and hopefully the whole emphasis of what we've studied to this point has been encouraging that in you. Words of creativity, ranging widely, lateral thinking, spanning the whole sector, the remote environment, the close environment. It's all about scoping widely, but importantly asking the right questions. Why is this happening? What's behind this? Can I take that at face value, or is that really just a symptom of something else that's happening in the marketplace? Kind of related to that is the idea of scanning actively in the right places. Some people call this sort of lowering the microscope. So we do this wide scan, this wide scope, we ask questions and so on. Then we hone in on certain things and we scan in particular aspects. So there's an interesting looking technology. Can we kind of lower the microscope on that and see whether it may have some implication for our strategy? The third thing that they indicate is interpreting what the signals mean, and we're kind of very much involved in that process at the moment. Fourthly, probe carefully for more information. So that's emphasising this iterative thing. It goes over and over. It's not just linear. We don't just go bang, 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 bang. We get to this point and then we might double back. We might get some more information. We might reconsider, reassess, reweight, and so on. So probe carefully for more information to be as informed as you can be. And then the fifth and final point that they suggest in terms of becoming vigilant is act judiciously to stake out your options early. So what they mean is that if you see a promising technology, but you're not sure whether it's going to become mainstream in your market, take a position. You don't have to bet the company on it, but maybe you either say, we'll fund a little bit of research to explore this in more detail. We might take this to a certain stage of commercialisation and then reassess it in terms of whether it's going to be useful for us or not. But take a position early so that if that does start to become more mainstream in your market over time, you're in a position to be able to act on it quickly, and it may even become a critical success factor in its own right. Okay, well, in a kind of a practical sense, you have a reading provided by Paul Shoemaker from the Sloan Management Review. So for your scenario analysis that you're going to be engaged in now, I want you to work through the 10 steps that are in that reading that has been provided. Now you will note there's a there's a step 9, which I don't want you to worry about. That's quite a formalised, laborious process that's probably beyond our capability at this moment. But read through the 8 steps and then the 10th step. Have a go at applying that sort of scenario thinking to your particular project at this point. And the main purpose of this whole exercise in this course, the strategic marketing context, is to really pull together the main analysis elements that we've looked at to this point, to kind of develop a summation, holistic sort of view, sketching out various scenarios based on the analysis that you've done, and perhaps making assumptions about different conditions that could play out. So if, for instance, the New Zealand government becomes even more insistent on sustainable business practices, what implication does that have under your sort of various scenarios? If 4G networks arrive in New Zealand within your 5-year frame rather than outside it, then what sort of scenario might play out that won't be in the market tomorrow, but potentially could have implications for 3 or 4 years out? If food regulations continue to tighten in the New Zealand context, then how might that be fitted into the sort of scenarios that might play off that sort of assumption? So in summary, we're trying to get a sense of the shape and texture of your near market in the future by exploring the boundaries of various possibilities. And scenarios allow us to do that. This might seem a remote scenario, but it's a possibility. Another one down here. So you don't need a whole list of these things, but you might have 3, 4, 5 scenarios that will play out that explore the boundaries of your particular near market. And then that, if it's done well, should set the scene for thinking about where we want our firm or organisation to be in the future on the basis of what seems to be the most plausible scenario. So at some point you have to lock in on one and take that as the basis for your strategy. And that particular step is going to become the focus of our next module.